So welcome, viewers. You may recognize me. I'm Adam. This is, in fact, Graduating Gaming, but we're doing a slightly different thing here. I've assembled a super crew of friends to help me talk about narrative and story in games this week. And the idea is that every once in a while we'll have one of these little discussions on a topic with the assembled team of the week. So I'll go ahead and let my team for this week go ahead and introduce themselves. We'll start with Dez. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks for picking me to go first, Adam.
Anytime.
I'm Dez. I'm an attorney in Portland, and I play mostly RPGs and some amount of Take Over the World type games. And I'm a thorn in Adam's side with all things to do with stories.
A good introduction. It encapsulates you perfectly, Dez. Drew.
Hey, I'm Drew. I'm a software consultant in Chicago. When I'm not doing that, I write freelance and blog and all that. I'm not sure, we may have to check on this, the resident disproportionate player of indie games in the group. So I play a ton of those. Yeah, happy to be here.
Excellent. And Todd.
All right, hi, I'm Todd Aldridge. I'm a lowly graduate student studying American literature. I'd say my gaming preferences are, I don't know, pretty vanilla. I play on Xbox, and I have a confession to make. I probably sunk in hundreds of hours into Mass Effect, all of the franchise.
As your shirt might attest.
Maybe, I don't know, but happy to be here.
Poorly kept secret.
Yeah,
I know. Happy to be here.
Oh, happy to have you. So the basic idea here is that the four of us are going to spend about half an hour just talking about our selected topic, and then when I have a new topic, I'll do another one of these, maybe with some of the same people, maybe not. This week, though, I've been seeing a lot of conversations lately in the press and kind of in less formal avenues, forums and discussions and things, about what the correct role of story is in games and how it's best deployed. And people seem to have kind of a lot of strong opinions on this, despite the fact that games have succeeded doing lots of story, no story, story different ways. In particular, I was arrested by a panel at the Rezzed conference in the UK a couple months back, where they got Ragnar Turnquist, who makes these adventure games, and one of the developers of DayZ, and just a whole spectrum of people up there to talk about story. And they had completely different ideas as to what could and should be done in games, just from every imaginable angle. So it's this contentious conversation, but with a lot of possible answers. So I figured we'd go ahead and start with just what do you guys each look for in stories when you play games? If anybody just wants to volunteer to go first.
I'll go. Sure.
Sure, Todd. What do you look for?
It kind of depends on the genre of the game, Like I do like a lot of depth. Like when I was a kid, I think my favorite game was like Final Fantasy III, which I think was actually 6, but it was the one where you could have the big like Wendigo monster involved. Anyway, like that was great. But like I equally enjoy like games like Suda51, like Shadows of the Dam, where it's just really one long series of penis jokes. Like it's just funny. It's wrapped around that. I get on board with that. So I think it really depends on the type of game it is. But I'll take whatever it is as long as it's kind of, I don't know, consistent, I guess, with the tone.
Cool. Yes.
I mean, it depends, like Todd said, a lot on what genre it is. If I'm, as you've had so many updates on recently, Adam, playing something like Europa Universalis, then the story emerges basically on who I'm declaring war on. On the other hand, I was corrupted to games generally by things like Myst and particularly The Seventh Guest, which is, despite having been puzzle games both, are really quite story dependent and not at all suitable for third graders, but that's a different issue. And so a lot of what I play with RPGs, I look for very direct stories, particularly where choice does affect things, even if it's, something that doesn't close off potential things, but instead, the story has minor affect on the outcome of the game. So, Alistair gets to be king, or he gets to be a depressed drunk.
Right, Dragon Age Origin.
Make Alistair sad.
Oh, that was sad, man.
I always wish you could be a drunken, depressed king, but that's that.
I think that's if you marry him to Honora.
Oh, okay. Yeah, excuse me. Absolutely. I'll jump in. Like, I actually would love to both praise and pick on Mass Effect in this way, because I've noticed what I really look for in a game story these days. I just noticed this pattern in myself, like what I'm reacting to. World building is huge because games are so good at it. Like, if it's providing imagination food, almost the way a novel or a series of novels would, I'm all about that. I'm such a sucker for it. I will praise Dark Souls to the sky for that reason, right? But Mass Effect also commits the cardinal sin that I think games do, which is trying to be a movie. When games try to be movies, I mean, right down to the like fake Paul Greengrass choppy shots and blurred cameras and stuff. I'm talking with my hands, which is probably creating that effect, right? It drives me nuts because games aren't movies and more.
And connection.
But
the Mass Effect guys have smited thee.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, maybe this is me showing my indie snobbery. I don't know, but it seems to me that the games can do more interesting things than be shitty movies.
No, that's definitely a thing.
Perhaps recapping everything after you mentioned Paul Greengrass because for about 30 to 45 seconds.
First swear, first negative comment, first technical glitch. Yeah, terrible.
I told you. So, the Mass Effect God smited thee.
They did. I've been smote. So what I was simply saying, games are not good at being movies. That's the thing. Like it's a very short-lived phenomenon when we can convince ourselves that a game looks cinematic. Because as soon as we take one more step forward with graphics, we look at the cinematic games of yesterday, and there's something kind of maybe endearing or maybe pathetic, but definitely not convincing about their attempts.
Or, worst of all, Uncanny Valley.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and it's one of the perennial criticisms of special effects in film criticism is it looks video gamey. And that's not an accident, I don't think, that keeps coming up. So I think it's a good point that, that games aren't as good at being movies as movies are. But, you also, as you said, you brought up Mass Effect, is, as a game, really incredibly ambitiously gamey, because it's trying to track all of these ways in which you've made a difference to the way the story is going to go. Which I think is really kind of where the rubber meets the road in differentiating game stories in a lot of ways. It's not the only determining factor, but the degree to which the player controls the events around them is one of the things that kind of determines where on the narrative spectrum you fall. Something like Minecraft, of course, no story to speak of. You wander around and make your own little...
no story you don't create yourself, I would say.
Right. Well, this actually gets into something that I'm going to cannibalize from James Portnow. At least that's where I got it from, is the difference between story as predetermined events that are written, into the game, and narrative as things that contribute to setting, character, emergent plots, but that aren't predetermined.
Okay.
Yeah, totally.
That's a useful distinction.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, and I think if you view it through that lens, Mass Effect, the series, has one of the better narratives in gaming, even though the plot sort of ranges from functional to terrible with the White Jesus space opera stuff. And that's kind of an impressive thing for a game to be able to be at once, I think.
What were you saying, Des?
I was trying to distinguish between essentially story and narrative there without using the terminology you had intended to. Because you can certainly get narrative in Minecraft. It just takes a particularly ambitious set of servers to get on that. Because you can definitely have, entire cities, structures, whatnot, wars even within a Minecraft server. But that's not really my scene. I hear about it mostly from Rachel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe Notch even said one time, the creator of Minecraft, for anybody who's watching this and doesn't know, I don't know who that would be, but on that Venn diagram. But Notch one time said that the reason he didn't have someone come in and make his bad graphics better is because when your imagination has to fill in the blanks, the game becomes more like reading a book than watching a movie.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I would agree with Drew's point that the story of Mass Effect is at times functional or forced, CEG Vermeer. But as far as the narrative, BioWare's two major settings, or major present settings, that is Dragon Age and Mass Effect, are incredibly effective at generating narrative, particularly if you look at all of the headcanons and just the sheer myriad of them that exist, and how thoroughly people defend their own headcanon, even against BioWare canon.
Definitely. Well, and I would also like to point out, you mentioned Minecraft servers as being a place where narrative can emerge from that, but like, even just reskinning your Minecraft game can change the narrative. It looks a certain way. If you put a sci-fi skin on it, right, that changes the narrative that emerges from how it was before. And so, things like soundtrack and, the length of the day, all of these things kind of affect, the story of you playing that particular world, even if you're by yourself. But one of the things that I hear a lot is that, one of the sides of that is that that's what games can do that nothing else can do. That's where we should point our efforts, because this is game narrative. It emerges from systems. The other side says, well, that's not really story at all. It's, morphing the details of a playthrough, but it's not actually story in the game. It's, taking place in the player's imagination.
I think we definitely, even though games are very good at providing what I was calling earlier imagination food or whatever, things that go around the plot and aren't explicitly story-based, but that, that are there in our narrative in Portnow's sense, there's a real temptation and I think a real hunger among the people who play games for exposition dumps and explicit information. I mean, even we're kind of cycling around Mass Effect, but in the first game, you get to sit down and have a TV interview with an existential threat. You talk to a Reaper, and there are certain cool things where it's like, well, you wouldn't understand why we're doing what you're doing with your meat computer, but you still get to sit down and get exposition from the existential threat, which is like a weird, clunky thing that games do, even though they're a thing games can do. So it's an interesting.
Tell me, man.
I not like it when Drew talks about.
I think it's almost.
The Mass Effect gods are not happy. Casey Hudson, dude.
I'll go. I'll just not talk about Mass Effect. So I don't know how much you heard, but I was just saying it's crazy that you talk to a Reaper and that it gives you exposition, because the strength of the Reapers as a plot device or a narrative device is that they're an existential threat. There's precious few of those in games. Usually there's nothing the protagonist can't handle with a well-timed combo.
Right.
Well, I mean, even the existential nature of that threat is later demolished when you awkwardly roll your way through a combat with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this may be, so this is, in certain circles, the elephant in the room with this conversation would be the whole idea of ludonarrative dissonance, as Clint Hocking called it in relation to the first Bioshock, which, again, for anybody who doesn't know this debate, the idea is that games very frequently will tell you that the story is one thing, but then have you do something else. Classic example would be Bioshock, but also like the Uncharted games, any of Naughty Dog's games, where you're supposed to, especially the Uncharted games, you're this heroic Indiana Jones guy, but you're killing a psychopathic quantity of people.
Right.
And the game doesn't make any attempt to reconcile those two things. You're just doing that killing because it's a game.
The other recent thing that actually, the talking point there in the conversation has gotten so big that Gunpoint came out this summer, and at the end of the game has you updating your character's live journal, essentially. And you actually get an achievement called games journalism if you remark on your live journal that, I don't know, I think I may have killed more people than I saved. And the description under the achievement is, in order, the requirement to get the achievement is acknowledge ludonarrative dissonance.
Right. Well, that's, I mean, a cited form of ludonarrative dissonance, but it's not.
It's not just the Mass Effect gods.
Yeah, apparently not.
It's either the gods of games generally, or it's AT&T.
It's one of the two. Which, I mean, which is the more malevolent force? I don't know.
AT&T.
Yeah,
the NSA is
AT&T.
listening.
They are. I don't know if they care, but they're listening. I'll make one more attempt to say what I was saying. So the killing way more people than the game acknowledges you're killing thing is the most commonly cited form of ludonarrative dissonance, but there's lots of other ones. There's the fact that narratively MMOs tend to be about you doing these epic feats and changing the world, but mechanically you're a guy on an assembly line doing the same thing everyone else is doing and affecting the world in no way.
Yeah, remind me to mention the secret world. Go ahead, Des.
Okay. Yeah.
I recently fell prey to Neverwinter because I have friends who wanted to play games. And you are signed up to, save the city of Neverwinter from, very specifically, the Demi-Lich or whatever the hell she is, and her risen pet dragon. And you see them twice. Once during your introductory, hour-long tutorial that you cannot skip out of and that does not have all of the game's mechanics. I'm not actually going to get very much into how I dislike that game. But, then sometime around level 30, in a game that is 60 levels long, and goodbye, Todd. Hopefully
I'm glad at least it isn't just me.
Yeah, hopefully he'll come back.
But you are explicitly told you are here to save the city from this existential threat. Now go farm 60 levels doing random other shit.
or the classic Dragon Age 2 thing where blood magic is terrible, but you can use blood magic in front of people and no one cares.
Or even worse in the first Dragon Age, where you can turn Wynn into a blood mage.
Sure, right, totally. So I mean, not to steal your moderator chair, Adam, but are there games that do this really right? Are there games where the mechanics feel like they really support the plot or the narrative, or vice versa?
Well, Adam's got an answer to that.
Oh, I was going to let you go first, as if you wanted to, because my moderator is...
I don't really have an answer that springs immediately to mind in any game that I have played. However, I'm going to set you up to talk about Spec Ops.
Yes. Well, better people than I, smarter people than I have talked about Spec Ops, at length, including my first video here is a fairly lengthy take. So the first Graduate Gaming video on how the mechanics of Spec Ops inform its narrative. But the thing about that is that as a story, right, Spec Ops mechanics work against its narrative. But as like a theme and a message, the mechanics support it wholeheartedly because the mechanics are unreal. It feels dissonant with the story that it's telling, which then gets you to the narrative. So this is actually the only case I can think of, especially in what might loosely be called AAA gaming, where the story and the narrative are actually opposed to one another. Everything that's written in as a sequence of events is actually put in opposition to the whole point. So it's maybe like a film negative example of what Drew is asking for. Weirdly enough, the first thing that comes to my mind, though, as a positive example, is actually Left 4 Dead, particularly Left 4 Dead 2. Oh, good, Todd's back.
Excellent.
But
Thank you.
Left 4 Dead 2 is the mechanics are cooperative zombie horde murder. And that's exactly what the story is there to tell. Now, of course, it's a very bare bones story. It's people go from here to here to here, get rescued or not. But I would argue, though, that it does have a very rich narrative. It's got each of its levels have a sense of place. Its characters are very well realized in just their little conversations, and everything about the visual design of the game kind of gels together into this particular version of the zombie apocalypse. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind for ludonarrative accord, perhaps.
Ludonarrative assonance. I don't know what you would call it, but it's
Accord, I think, is better than assonance. Assonance being, a well-defined rhetorical figure.
Fair enough.
Having just spent the duration of Adam's response scrolling through my Steam library, I actually think that Cairo, which is a lovely little indie puzzle game that's almost entirely emergent narrative that rather than story proper, it's a game where you find yourself in this ruins of a civilization. No words are used throughout the entire game, and you sort of have to figure out what the shit is going on. But the mechanics are essentially exploration and sort of pushing buttons or being at a particular place to do a particular thing, and symbol manipulation, and it is all about playing around with your confusion. And to that end, I would say that you get less dissonance where there is less story, because at that point the mechanics cause the story to emerge, and therefore it's almost definitionally harmonious.
Mm-hmm. Have any how many of us here have played the Walking Dead adventure game?
Alex has, I haven't.
Drew looks frozen, but I'm relatively sure he has.
And who knows about
I
Todd?
had to answer that question.
Are you there, Todd?
Was that question who's played the Walking Dead game? Because I tried to raise my
Yes.
hand and the gods smote me again. Yeah, so yes, definitely.
So this question of ludonarrative dissonance or harmony becomes interesting in that case because there's not a whole lot of, like, the player input is crucial, but it's portioned out very sparingly. And actually, I mean, if you feel like elaborating, Drew, sadly it looks like Todd's technical problems have defeated him.
I'll re-invite him, or...
Well, it'll be... I think it'll be fine. He's got better things to do with his evening than wrestle technical difficulties, I think.
Fair.
But anyway, where I was going with that is that the gameplay itself, since it's not a set of player action mechanics, it's a set of input mechanics. Kind of, it's almost not vulnerable in most points to the gameplay.
That sounds like you're almost describing Dwarf Fortress.
That's actually another interesting case.
Yep.
But no,
Yeah,
it's not so much autonomy as it is that everything almost everything in The Walking Dead is contextual. Drew, you've thought about this, I think, more than I have. If you want to jump in here and
well, again, I mean, The Walking Dead again is almost like the Mass Effect games in that it's got like the best and the worst, on this. Like it's the moments. I think you're right. The dialogue options and the quick events and things like that. I guess you'd call them quick time events. Are not to say ludonarrative dissonance, but then when you start having to do adventure game crap. You have to use the rib separator to hold the door open. Sometimes it just feels silly. Sometimes it feels insane because you're told this is an urgent thing you're doing, and the only tool the game has in its disposal to make it feel urgent is if you don't do it fast enough, you die and you have to do it again, which is not different from just giving you longer to do it.
Although there is something to be said, I think, at least in a couple of the episodes, for when you
Hooray!
Todd is
Right
at least
speaking.
temporarily back. But there are times where even the if you fail this QuickTime event, it is used, I think, narratively well. I remember
That's true. That is true.
dying in a particular moment on the dairy farm, not to, keeping it vague, not to spoil anything. But seriously, if you haven't played The Walking Dead by now, you really should do that.
I already spoiled the rib separator puzzle, so.
Oh.
Statute of limitations on spoilers applies.
Yeah, but on the dairy farm, there's a sequence where you're hidden in a stall, and one of the bad guys, like you go to exit the stall, you open the door, and one of the bad guys has a rifle pointed directly at your head, and you have about a half a second to press a button to wrestle the rifle out of the way, and if you don't, you get shot. And this is what happened to the group I was playing through it with. We died. We were like, oh God, we decompressed for a minute. We're sitting there talking. In the meantime, the game has loaded back up at the moment of the door opening, so we get shot again because we weren't expecting it to start back while we were in jeopardy.
Yeah. I don't mean to pick nits, because when it comes to leading you to make questionable decisions based on fear, The Walking Dead nails it. It's so good at that.
But you're absolutely right about the adventure game sections. I remember in particular the train sequence. There's like this moment where there's a tool chest of things you have to go like pick the one thing out of to go into the I don't guess
there's really only one game that I can think of that has done we're going to try to make something urgent by putting a time limit on it, and there will be a consequence to it if you don't do it to our satisfaction. Mm-hmm. And that was Zork Nemesis.
Wow.
Which was this, like, 2000, 2001-ish, maybe a little bit earlier, late 90s maybe, someone in there. But Zork with graphics, though, and they were fucking gorgeous. But all about alchemy, this game. So the climax of the game is you running through this alchemy thing where each set of, like, alchemical materials that you're gathering, purifying, blah, 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 putting into symbols, each represents a character, and you're trying to make the Philosopher's Stone to bring back from the dead the person whose death started off the game. And if you fuck it up, you get a different ending, and you cannot go back.
Mm-hmm.
To cite a more current example or a more recent example, Papers, Please. I mean, that's definitely a game where you can screw up based on time. For anybody who hasn't played it, because it's a relatively small game.
Haven't played that yet, but have heard things about it.
You're a border agent in a fictional post-Soviet, kleptocratic dystopia, and all
Kafkaesque, I believe, is the term applies.
Highly Kafkaesque, and you receive these cryptic, again, Kafkaesque instructions about what you do that day, and all you do is process paperwork. And if you don't process enough people, you have a harder time feeding your family. If you hesitate too long because you're trying to, help someone, you have a harder time feeding your family. So there are consequences. The game keeps going. You can get arrested. There are sort of fail states, but there's also a lot of stuff that can happen that just makes your life harder, and you have to try and live with it. And it's really cool because it's definitely a game that it gives you some sympathy for the banality of evil, where it's easy to sort of dismiss that whole thing as like, oh, those people are just henchmen, it's the best henchman simulator I've ever seen, even though that's not quite what it intends to be. But
yeah, well, it's also a game I think that is light on story. There's a through narrative there through in the form of the headlines. I didn't get very far into it as a disclaimer. Because I was terrible at it, and I got arrested within the first week. But it's also a game that I think has a good example of narrative richness without necessarily, an intricate story. It's everything in the game looks, and sounds like this, kind of Orwellian place. People are all kind of matte, hideous, run-down-looking folks in lumpy clothes. The line is all just silhouettes. All the sounds are these hollow, tinny, indecipherable sound bites. It's a very concerted aesthetic that conveys a lot of narrative without necessarily being plot or character. And in fact, even the writing in the game, such as it is, mostly takes place in the form of your instruction book from day to day, your handbook on how to handle the border. And that is written in such a way as to evoke this, 1984 kind of newspeak, environment. I guess
Yeah.
kind of the debate going on right now is that inherently a better way to go than to have, a linear or a branching story?
I think
I
that
think-
they're.
Oh, go ahead.
I mean,
think that
I would
they're-
definitely
sorry.
shy away from the idea that it's an inherently
And the
a
award
branching
for
story,
best-
arguably too.
And we missed all the
cut out
middle.
again.
Man, well,
Next
I've
time, just write
reconciled
your
this
answer
problem.
out and hold it up.
I broke this YouTube video, but it's I was just saying I would shy away from the idea that it's inherently better, but
Yeah.
it is something that a game can do that a book can't. Whereas telling you a really good story, non-linear is an interesting concept, right? Because like in a really, really basic structural way, a film is always linear, a book is always linear, a game is never linear. Because a game, you could do something other than the thing you're supposed to do. Whereas a film always proceeds in the order it's supposed to be in a book, while you could read it out of order, still exists with pages in an order.
I would submit that books can, in very limited circumstances, namely choose your own adventure,
Oh yeah.
be nonlinear.
Oh yeah.
However, that is not
know.
necessarily a good thing for a book to be.
Sure, but it's also a slight abuse of the term nonlinear. It's more like, you know what I mean? You turn to a certain page, but it's rough.
It is nonlinear in that it branches. There are the, and you're frozen again.
Yeah, well, it's a
in
question in
sequence.
games of degrees. You have strictly linear. The most recent high-profile, enactor of that was probably Final Fantasy 13, where it's literally a linear hallway.
You're in hallways, yeah,
a
totally.
really long time.
Oh yeah.
And then the only thing that can vary is how quickly you traverse them. And up to, kind of like loosely linear, something like a more classic JRPG where you may visit towns, in between or go side questing or something like that. To branching, which is the BioWare Obsidian thing, to Bethesda, right, which is kind of an open world where you assemble your, pieces of narrative out of the available ones, kind of a buffet, and then there's a main, course in the middle somewhere that you can revisit from time to time, and
Or
GTA,
ignore entirely.
or yeah, you can just kind of ignore it.
Yeah, you could play
I have-
Skyrim for 200 hours and just collect cabbages.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
That
and
sounds
there's
fun.
also the Minecraft DayZ emergent thing, kind of all the way on the other end, and somewhere in there's that weird space of things that either don't try to have a story or a narrative at all. I think some casual games or party games maybe, and then things that allow their narrative to emerge from the set dressing.
I think that modern AAA or would-be AAA RPGs are sort of suffering from the old dissonance between JRPGs, which were linear with intermittent side quests and limited character development, blah, 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 and the old CRPG, the Western RPG model, which was linear quest of not authorial, but player insertion character plus companions with your 6th chapter side quests per Baldur's Gate. And then there's sort of the third model, which is the holy shit, let's play in a sandbox. And usually they pick two, which often ends up being you can either have an open world and a very limited protagonist character development, a la BioWare, or not BioWare, but Bethesda recently, so Skyrim and whatnot, where you can be, the savior of mankind, an assassin, a thief, and a mage, because you can do everything. There aren't really any, in that game at least, that are self-contradictory, unlike in Morrowind, where you could be the head of 2 churches and the Thieves Guild. What? But then you have things like the BioWare games, where you have limited world action. You can go to Noveria, you can go to I'm forgetting the other planets' names. Bleep that out and insert the right ones.
Mos Eisley. Mos Eisley. No.
Thank you. The other one, let's say. And,
Omega.
you know,
Omega would be another one, right?
or in Dragon Age, you can go to the Dales, or you can go to the Tower first, but you proceed within those in a set order, and you have some choices that affect how your companions feel about you, and therefore give you an implicit sense of protagonist development, because there are bars telling you so. And there isn't really... It is hard to have player involvement in the outcome and a predefined player-protagonist development. And that, I think, is what they are trying to reconcile that in modern RPGs.
I think it's not for nothing that when we were sort of all trying to come up with games that get the accord of play and narrative right, we went with a game that was from the Wild West days of genre, a Zork game. I haven't played Zork Nemesis, but I totally will now. We went with... I should. I know.
It is really hard, but it is awesome.
I am totally down. And then a game, Papers, Please, which is like, have you ever heard of a document thriller before? It's just like in a brand new genre. And then Spec Ops: The Line, which is, its whole project is to punch genre in the face or butt up against the limits of genre. Mm-hmm. So I think being hamstrung by genre is a part of what holds back some game narratives, because I can't remember who it was who made this observation. It might have been Portnow as well, that games are the only medium where our genres have nothing to do with what happens in them. It's more about the mode of interaction. A first-person shooter is a genre rather than a drama or a crime procedural being a genre. Mm-hmm. So, it's only natural that what the story is may not have to do with, you hover a reticule over a guy and click on his head and he falls over and stops moving. Doesn't have anything necessarily to do with, American exceptionalism in a city full of sky racists. Like, those two things, of course they don't line up, because they're, why would they,
That is the best description of BioShock Infinite I think I've heard.
Yeah. I forgot about attacking people with crows and setting them on fire. But other than that,
that's beautiful.
Yeah, all right. And the magical ghost pants, that was also a pretty
cool
that
cool actually brings us kind of full circle to what Todd started us off with, which was the idea that narrative and genre, like the type of story and the genre, should have some sort of awareness of one another, which actually is a decent place to bring this next. Why in the world do we have this emphasis lately on the AAA side of things on story in games that clearly don't need it to sell? I'm looking at the modern warfare genres and Halo 4, right? 343 went bent over backwards to assure people that they were going to be nice to the Halo story, when I don't know anybody that buys Halo for the story. I know several people who don't even play the campaign when they buy it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are people who don't care about story that care about stewardship, though, right? I think that's why in Diablo 3, when Deckard Cain comes on, you could practically hear the sitcom audience clapping. Like, it's people want the guy they like to be treated with respect, and beyond that, they don't care. Maybe that's part of it? I don't know.
Well, I think that you're doing story a disservice here by invoking Diablo.
That disservice was on Diablo's part, my friend.
Blizzard in general does not focus on story very much, but at the same time, they're pretty much the reason why real-time strategy games have stories at all.
Yes. That's a debate you and I have had frequently.
Yeah.
I think that time the all-powerful Blizzard shadow government smote me, so I missed a beat. But
well, yeah, they have.
Or everyone's smiting post this evening.
Yeah.
Apparently. Well, so I don't know if I missed this and this is what you said, or if this doesn't have anything to do with anything, but Diablo 3 is an interesting game in that its story is terrible, but it really, really, really wants you to take it seriously. It desperately wants you to care about these dudes and feel like you're doing something even though you're not. You're just showing up and then stuff happens around you. It's definitely a game where the tone and the scope of the story don't match, and I think that's, again, relatively common where you're told exciting things are happening and the world is changing, but you're the least interesting person in the story, and you're not really doing anything to it. I mean, even Gone Home, right, which is, I thought, a really good example of how just an environment can tell a story and how text can, it can accord itself well with a 3D world and all that stuff. Even in that, you're the least interesting person in the story by far. I mean, Katie's a reasonably well-drawn character, but she's not half as interesting as anybody else in there. So, if I'm the only one here who's played Gone Home, then I apologize. But
I think you are, although it's on my list. And
It is on my list.
Robin and Katie, I think, are Twitch TV live casting their playthrough of it now.
Oh, wow, cool.
Although, as far as games I haven't played that I'm interested in seeing how they affect this whole conversation, Starbound.
Oh, yeah. Starbound could be real interesting.
Insofar as it promises to have, the ruins of ancient civilizations, each planet being unique NPCs, and all of these things, where it's looking like it's going to try very, very, very hard to have emergent narrative, mostly by giving you sort of narrative pellets like a good little rabbit.
Cube World is kind of flirting with that too. Cube World being that game it's like Minecraft with stuff to do is sort of the original thesis statement, but it's like a dungeon crawl in a procedurally generated voxel world. And when you go to the town and you get quests from people, there's kind of this Mad Libs version of why you need to go fight this monster. And if they expand it and it becomes this like procedurally generated lore, it could be pretty fun. Rakthor is attacking it, because it points out that that's all it ever is in a lot of things.
But at the same time, like, that also can quickly become Dungeons of Dreadmore.
Very true. Very true.
Where you have
no bad thing in itself.
Lucia, the goddess of side quests.
Right.
Generated side quests. Or to use a more relevant example in the realm of like big budget, kind of odd attempts at story, the holy grail of MMORPGs for a while has been seen as the MMO that will let you, be the star and tell the story and so on and so forth, which was kind of the Old Republic's gambit, and of course failed utterly because of course it did. The format is inimical to having a dynamic story with a central character, which is partially a segue to my reminder earlier in the video to talk about The Secret World, which of course does the opposite of that. It makes a really interesting series of places with in-world explanations for why they're stuck that way, why everything always resets when you're gone 10 minutes, and it has characters remark on like, gee, there sure are a lot of you superpower people hanging around lately. Not that I'm complaining. We need the help against these zombies who keep coming back to life. It's kind of almost a
deconstruction of the genre.
Yeah, and it seems to me to work better than anything I've played in the genre for that reason, because it's focusing on multiple and not on individual story.
To me, the question that, as somebody who takes games kind of seriously and finds himself defending them to people who don't play them relatively often, the question that keeps me up at night, and this ties together with BioShock Infinite, I think, is can games tell stories about self-aware, reflexive.
Can games tell stories about? Go.
It was literally in the middle of your question.
Can games tell stories, I was asking, about things other than games? Because it seems sometimes like all of the most praiseworthy narratives, going back to people thinking the first BioShock was the second coming,
right.
or BioShock Infinite or whatever, it seems like a lot of the narratives we find most praiseworthy are really self-aware. I don't know that there's anything really wrong with that. I worry a little sometimes that, it goes back to the batting up against genre thing. Like how long can we think we're clever for noticing that stuff? Not that that's all The Secret World does. Or even for that matter, all that BioShock does. But
right.
I don't know. It's a weird thing that games lean on pretty heavily.
I think games can tell stories that other media can't. It's just that you have to consider the stories collectively or sort of superimposed a la Schrödinger states. So if you map out all of the possibilities of 3 Mass Effect games, or even to take an example that I like defending because I thought well after the fact it was a well-done game, even though most other people hated it, Dragon Age 2.
I like Dragon Age 2.
There are all kinds of different choices that affect the story to varying degrees, even though it forces you, like a very good tragedy, that's what they were trying to tell as a story there, it forces you back to one primary outcome. Namely, you kill everyone.
I think I agree with you that Dragon Age 2 got a bad rap, by the way. The repetitive nature of the fighting was goofy, but, you know.
Right, the cave. The cave was
great
awful.
Story shoehorned in with your killing dudes over it.
Yeah. The cave was awful, and it was, like, not to overly praise it, but they were trying to do an Elizabethan tragedy in 3 acts in a video game, which is phenomenally novel, and something I think they actually accomplished pretty well. They just didn't telegraph that that's what they were doing, thus disappointing people who were expecting otherwise.
It's pretty much an unqualified success at that if you close your eyes and plug your ears and go la 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 for all the stuff about going to dungeons that are the same over and over, fighting the same dudes in town over and over.
Yep.
Speaking of ludonarrative dissonance, right? The town is populated to one degree outside of fights, and then you slaughter 9 times that many people with an act.
But they're all bad people.
Oh,
it's not so much that it's more of a
you couldn't see my eyes shifting.
The dungeon crawling is another good example of that. In that you go back to the same cave again, you would expect after all of this kind of characterization for one of them to be like, haven't we been here before? At least one of the times that you go back there, which is I think what people were reacting to, and not so much. I mean, in the discussion that I saw, not so much the actual arc of the story. Except for the very end.
Right, but the very end was the inevitable, and it was sort of a usurpation of player character as main character, because in many ways, again, statute of limitations on spoilers, go play the silly game, Anders is the main character of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't pick him up, and you can not pick him up, or never play with him, or kick him out of your party, or whatever.
You monster.
I mean, I'm not saying I did any of these things, but Broody Elf all the way.
Broody Elf.
You know who I'm talking about.
Yes.
But the end of Act 3 is still the same, is still the story of Anders being mad at the Chantry.
Yeah.
And possessed by a justice demon. What?
That's what?
This thing over here.
Yeah, there's this other thing. So we can wind this down. I kind of want to pose a kind of final kind of a wrinkle, I guess here in that I mentioned the compulsion, in the industry to say, no, we're going to have great story as maybe, I don't know, grabbed for legitimacy or else trying to widen the audience or something like that. Even in games where it's not really, germane to their sales. But, do you guys have any thoughts on, why this is the moment where we're having this conversation kind of large scale, in a couple of different places, and where we might, think it would go, and if you feel like bringing the poor neglected fad into this this particular closing topic here, we haven't discussed the emphasis on things like randomization, roguelikes, and procedural generation very much either.
I think that might be a topic for another time. Regardless of whether you include narrative in that discussion.
Yeah, but that is also very much part of the
right?
current moment in which this is having a which this conversation is going on. So
So I will say this: maybe this is just I don't know if I'm throwing a grenade and then running away or whatever, but there's a renewed emphasis in across the popular culture in world building in TV especially. Like people love Game of Thrones right now, and people love even Boardwalk Empire, which is historically situated, but it's very much about world building. I feel like roguelikes do something similar in a way because what they do is they build a world and then they let you interact with the whole system. It's not just like you were saying, it builds a story the way Minecraft builds a story. It's not the story of Anders being possessed. It's the story of the time we found that cave and there were a bunch of creepers in it and we died horribly, but then we went back and there was gold. And it's like those can be really cool stories. I think anybody who's gotten way into the Binding of Isaac has a great tale of woe and a great tale of victory under their belt. I was talking about
woe.
Mostly woe. Well, in Spelunky, everyone has their heartbreaking Spelunky story. And for a lot of people, that's the story of why they don't play Spelunky anymore. But it's a story. Yeah, right. But it's a story that you're engaged with emotionally in a way that I don't know. I've played games that I really, really enjoyed and was engaged with the story and liked the characters, but then I couldn't tell you anything about those stories necessarily. Yeah. A couple months after the fact. Roguelikes.
That's sort of how I feel about Terraria. And one of the reasons that I play Terraria with softcore characters, because there have been those times when I've forgotten to equip the Lucky Horseshoe.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is not the fall that kills you.
No.
No.
Oh.
Yeah. So.
As for my answer to why this question now, I think it's a matter of gamers coming of age, gamers becoming adults, gamers demanding adult games, and a lot of that is that we're no longer really satisfied with simple things. Or rather, simple things because we can't do more complex things.
Right. Makes sense.
I think there's two halves of it. There's this whole group of really interesting designers who are using games as a laboratory. Like, here's this exciting new medium. What can we do with it? And then on the other hand, there's an industry that, with ballooning budgets and profits to match, has been going to be the preeminent multimedia experience of the.
There he goes again. Right on cue.
Yep.
So it's in both senses. There's a lot of promise in games. Both from am I gone again? Did I go away again? I saw people smirking.
Right after you started dissing on AAA's.
No,
so
and here's the thing.
Problem.
I don't want to do that because I don't feel like that's fair. I just feel like there's a good side of the why now question to that discussion, which is that games are an exciting medium and we're learning how to do new things with them, and those things are interesting. But there's also kind of a cynical side, which is to your point about the box blurb about how wonderful the story is going to be. There's a certain sense in which, well, if it's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make, it may as well also have a story. It better, whether or not that adds anything. And it's a sort of a kitchen sink aspect. That people have been poking fun at for a while. I remember Super Meat Boy. The last bullet point was a story so heartbreaking you'll cry yourself to sleep for the rest of your life. Which obviously it didn't deliver on that.
Meat Boy.
It's Super Meat Boy. It's about a girl made of Band-Aids and stuff. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, the question is forced now. Whether we want to ask it or not, it's unavoidable, I think.
All right. Closing thoughts, Todd?
Oh man, I think they pretty much hit the nail on the head. I don't know. My thoughts are kind of wandering, but I tend to think that it kind of goes back to I don't know. Maybe I sound cynical, but like it's escapism. We have these really like big niche cultures where people can just dive in and immerse themselves. Like, I don't know, think of all the Harry Potter fans, the proliferation of like cosplay. We want to have some. We want to have really complex narratives people can get on board. On the one hand, like, yeah, let's create a franchise and make a lot of flipping money. At the same time, though, there's something satisfying about it because, sometimes it's nice to just go away from reality for a little bit.
Yeah.
Relax. Not think about.
I would say that, yeah, if you want a poster child for like the cynic, God, I sound like I'm hating on AAA so much, but if you want a poster child for the cynically adding way more plot so that you can keep making a series, Assassin's Creed is that all the way. All of the, what is it even called, Animus? All of the past lives nonsense adds nothing. And it's just to like link this endless procession of games that are otherwise not very linked.
Yeah.
Man, I don't even want to touch that convoluted. The
Yeah.
fun, the fun.
It may not be fair to hate on AAA's, but it's certainly easy.
We
well,
can.
I play and like a lot of AAA games, like, and I
Right,
think that goes for everybody here.
We were all talking about BioWare games for a lot of this, so...
Yeah.
Totally. And
it may not have come up, but Mass Effect 2 in particular is literally one of my favorite games of all time.
Oh yeah.
But not because of the main story. It's because the large part of your time is spent interacting with these characters, and you get to feel like you're there talking to them.
Amen.
Which maybe another a matter for another one of these sometime is what I like to think of as the never-ending story effect of games, of being able to place the player in the experience in kind of a literal way. But we've already gone well over the half-hour mark, so if there are any last thoughts, now is the time to get them out.
I love all this complicated, complex ideas that we have about games and narratives, but I wanted to ask you guys, what is your favorite, game story? You know what I'm saying? Or narrative, or whatever you want to call it. When you think of, this is the best story. The gameplay might have been horrible, or it might have been okay, but, what story did you really, get into?
I can't narrow it down to just one myself, but...
I can lead what you guys think if you don't mind. For me, Dude, Mass Effect 2. I love the getting the band back together story, man.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? The beginning of that, I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
What is going to happen?
Mass Effect 2 had one of the most effective openings.
That opening. But then, everyone's around, the reunion, I just got on board with that.
Welcome back to the game. First of all, we're going to kill you. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
we will...
I was playing it on a friend's computer, and it was late at night, and, 5 minutes in, and he said, Thanks for playing Mass Effect 2, and closed the laptop.
That was terrible, right? But it hooked you, right?
Well, then he immediately rebooted it, but still.
Yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was all complete. I liked how it was focused. You still had that choice where you could talk to people, you can affect it, though it is very much like a choose-your-own-adventure book. I agree with that, but that story, I don't know. I feel like I could always just kind of go back to it. I beat it a number of times, and I remember my last playthrough, I found something that I hadn't through, and I won't even give you the number of times I beat that game. Because I'm embarrassed. But, yeah, that's mine.
I have to say two, because one of them is the story that got me into games and warped me. The Seventh Guest.
Oh, really?
Which, as I said earlier, was not at all intended for third graders.
No.
It is a story about greed and lust and envy and murder of a child. And it has a devil analog and no good characters. And it was fascinating, particularly as a child who didn't understand much of what the hell was going on. And then on the other hand, holy shit, Morrowind. Morrowind is a story I would go back to again. Never mind that I have lost 2.5 years of my life to that game.
Nice.
Yeah.
Hard to argue with Morrowind. I would add this. So since we're talking about what originally screwed us up and got us into games, here's my third grade story: The Neverhood. The Neverhood was like a mind-boggling experience to me. It's a point-and-click adventure game. This was AAA at the time, so I think this redeems me slightly. But it's a point-and-click adventure game, and it's basically a claymation retelling of the Book of Genesis.
Wow.
Which I didn't grow up in a particularly religious household, so I didn't realize that until I was most of the way through, and I was like, wait, that guy's Satan, isn't he? So it opened up this whole world of the whole idea of retelling stories, the whole idea that the Bible wasn't just thumping said Bible. It just the whole idea of literature and all that stuff opened up to me. Plus fart jokes. It was a really, really great game. So that there was that for sure. But yeah, Morrowind, totally. The Mass Effect games I adore. I only hate on them because I love them, and I think that BioWare can keep doing better and better and more amazing stuff. And
I'm really excited for Inquisition.
Inquisition! I'm so stoked. I mean, so stoked. I honestly, I'm gonna confess, hand to God, I didn't play Old Republic at all. But anything they do that's not an MMO, I will happily devour.
Yeah, it always seems silly to me that they were making an MMO in the first place. But
I know.
my answer actually, especially if the trend is to go back, like stories are as much as anything why I play games. Even things like Crusader Kings 2, where the story is the one that like emerges from the death records of my royal line. Like that's what I do here. But Ogre Battle 64, I think, was the first game I played for its story. Like, specifically, like I liked the rest of the game, but it was also the first branching narrative that I ever played. And it doesn't branch a lot. It has just a few major branches and a couple minor ones, but they're meaningful. And your cast of characters, with a couple of tragic exceptions, are really well characterized and kind of they're taken through the whole thing. And the thing that struck me about it is that for all that there are these supernatural things in it, it's a political story. Which fits with the whole, noble intrigue thing, and as I've gone back and looked at it, as a graduate student in literature, I'm realizing that there are a lot of kind of allusions to that, even in just the naming conventions in the game. But like, more than anything else, when I think about what drew me to that game, it was the feeling that like, okay, yeah, there's a story here that's going to get told. Like, Lotus is always going to get kicked out of Palatinus, regardless of what you do. But the way you get from point A to point B matters, and the ability to affect that having it as a video game and not as a novel afforded me was incredibly powerful, especially in 7th, 6th grade. 7th.
I just realized a game that we are almost negligent in not having discussed in the context of narrative, namely Chrono Trigger.
Oh, yeah!
I was just thinking exactly that. I was just going to shortlist a couple of SNES games.
That's a branching narrative game that has, better than almost any game since, I would argue, choices that close off pieces of the narrative for that playthrough.
But they don't feel like you're just withholding content. They feel like meaningful choices.
And it's not and again, I do love Mass Effect. I'm not picking on it here to be mean, but it doesn't have the Mass Effect thing of like, which choice do you want? Tick tock, tick tock, tick. It's what you do, whether you know you're making a decision or not, that determines.
Right. Even something so simple as which party members you take on a thing.
Yeah. The thing about that, of course, is that I didn't actually get to play Chrono Trigger until I was in college.
I didn't either.
I missed it.
Oh.
Yeah.
I didn't play FF6 until I was in college.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't play Morrowind until
I wasn't allowed consoles growing up, and a friend of mine had an emulator on his machine, and that was how I spent many, many, many hours in his room, regardless of whether or not he or his roommates were there.
Wow, man.
Yeah. Well, and to try to wrap it up on a note being nice to Mass Effect, in retrospect, starting with Mass Effect 2 and the interrupt. Click left for a Paragon interrupt, click right for a Renegade interrupt. Those, to me, are actually like some of the best storytelling in that.
Right click to punch the reporter.
Oh, absolutely. Some of the best storytelling in that series. the single best use of QuickTime events I have ever seen, because there's no fail state. You can ignore them, or you make a choice in real time in the middle of the thing, and that's more than anything else where I felt in modern gaming like I was Shepard.
Right.
I was right there in real time.
Absolutely.
Immersed.
And that's to me for my experience, not that I'm saying that it has to be this way for everybody, but for my experience, that's what is so captivating to me about story in games.
Totally, absolutely, and whatever path you chose, you consciously felt that moment of, oh, the game's telling me that I, as Shepard, am tempted to punch this reporter, and I am. What do I do?
Do you punch? Do you not punch?
Who will I be
That's
today?
the question.
Yeah. And then that opens up onto a number of other very, I'm sure, fascinating conversations that sadly we don't have time for tonight. We've already gone to almost an hour where we were supposed to do half an hour.
Well, some amount of that's from start of broadcast, not start of discussion.
So I thank you guys immensely for joining me on your Friday night to put this together. It's always just a joy to talk to all of you about this sort of thing, and hopefully you'll rejoin me for a different topic in the future for another one of these graduated gaming discussions. So nice talking to you.
Yeah.
Thanks
Good
for having
night,
me.
Adam.
Yeah, thanks, man. Sooner the
Uh...